Good morning, good evening, good lunchtime, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to sunny Edinburgh, where I had a technical hitch to start off the show, which is never very good. The video froze there for some reason, but we're live now. So we are on a stream, and what that means is that we have a little place down the bottom here where we can add in comments and questions. So if you've got any comments, then please drop them in. Let us know who's watching out there in Radio Land. We love to give a shout out to anybody who is looking at the live. If you're watching the replay, then that's cool too. You can still put some comments in on the replay and we will have a look at that on LinkedIn. What have we done so far on these sessions? Well, there's been quite a few already. So if you haven't seen them, then the good news is that you can catch up with them on YouTube. There's now probably 7 going on 8 hours of myself and Steve talking about all things ITSM, but particularly ITSM maturity assessments and tool selection, where we've talked through things like a load of helpful tips and given you a mind map, and then taught you through some marvelous ideas to get a bit of discount when you go to buy a product. And today we're kind of looking at the quick start area of once you've chosen a product, how do you get going with it quickly and easily? And that is multiple different things that we're going to be talking about there. But if you have missed everything, then stuff is available on YouTube. So if you go scan the top barcode, then you can see our YouTube channel. It is a fledgling channel, which means that we haven't really organized everything wonderfully well, but the information's there. You may have to scroll through a few of the videos to get to the points where we're actually talking about the bits you want to hear. If you want that mind map with over 200 different features on it, then you can go to where our bot is pointing there and have a look at the mind map. If you haven't got your phone out quickly enough and in time, don't worry about it. These QR codes will come up a little bit later on. But without further ado, let's bring on my co-host. Steve, welcome back from 3 weeks in Florida.
3 weeks in Florida, which is very difficult to say. Yeah, fully refreshed, back, do this ITSM Explorers thing, take it through to the end of 2023 with some great content, I'm sure. So good to be back.
Great to have you back. For those who don't know us, we ought to do a quick introduction. I haven't put my teeth in straight again today.
All right, we'll correct all this in the edit, Martin. Yeah, the technical hitch at the beginning. This will all be fine once everyone sees it.
Yeah, well, it can be changed. We can make ourselves look better as well in the edit as well.
Yeah, let's do it.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin McKenna, based up in Edinburgh. I have been in ITSM since the 1980s, so a long time. I've worked on service desks. I've implemented more tools than you can possibly imagine. I've worked for 3 different service desk vendors, and I've run loads and loads of IT service management shows up in Scotland. So I have seen more tool demos than you could possibly imagine. So anyone who's been through the tool demo blindness, you're quite lucky. I've seen way more than you have, I absolutely guarantee. And I've seen loads of mistakes and loads of successful implementations. So hopefully we're going to share some tips with you today about those implementations. Steve, what is it that you do?
So I run a consulting firm called Cinead IT. We specialize in service management things like assessment, process design, operating model development, particularly things like tool selection and implementation. Like Martin, helps organizations choose and implement tools. And also we specialize, as I mentioned, in IT operating models, so particularly in those really complex multi-vendor models that use service integration and management. Yeah, lots of good industry experience to share with you.
And I should probably mention, I'm also a Freshworks partner. So if you want to speak about Freshworks, you can come and talk to me about Freshworks, but no sales pitches here today. What we are going to talk about, though, is a few of our experiences with regards to implementation. So what we're going to start off with is to have a look at some predictions. So What do I mean by predictions? What I mean is things that are going to happen on your service desk implementation, whether you like it or not. These things, I guarantee, will happen. So I've got three, and hopefully Steve's got a couple as well. So I am going to start off with one of my favorites, and this happens during the process at multiple different times, but it may well happen even after you bought a tool. And that is that at some point, somebody will jump up and say, if you give me 4 weeks in a hut in the forest, I can write this for you.
I've had this. I
Have you
had
had
this
that?
recently. Yeah, absolutely. This tool's really simple. I could code this in an afternoon. Why are we spending all this money on it? Yep. So it's definitely a valid one.
That will happen. Thousands and thousands of man hours have gone into the creation of all of these tools. You can't just go write it in a couple of weeks in the forest, regardless of how good you are as a coder. So just that person, take them outside, make sure they don't come back in the room again. You can't do it. These tools have been a long time in development. So that's number one. Somebody will say that, however.
Yeah, they will.
Number two, there will be a fight in the car park over category structures. This is something you would think was obvious and that everybody would agree on. They won't.
Yeah. No.
You'll come to categorize things, and people will want to go down to a ridiculously tiny level of detail in terms of categorizing the calls. You really, really don't want to do that. The trick there is you just want to categorize based upon what you're reporting on or acting on. And really, your category structures should be based around a business model as well. So towers
Top
of
tip there.
service.
Top tip there. Speak to a consultant or an implementer for your tool. So a Freshworks partner or an independent consultant, because we're going to have lots of examples in that area. And if you like, we can play the bad cop and say to all those people that are trying to introduce different ones, no, you're not having that. So often you can use us to your benefit. I know it's a shameless pitch, but it is one of the benefits that we bring, right? You don't want to argue with your colleagues. We're perfectly happy to. So yeah, that's a top tip to get over that one in particular. But that will happen. Martin's quite right.
Number three. Number three is that everybody will want to be notified about everything until they start getting the notifications, at which point they'll suddenly change their mind.
They'll
But
ignore them all.
and they will ignore them or decide that they don't want to be on that list. But to start off with, everybody will want to be notified about everything. So that's my three predictions of things that will happen. Steve, give us a couple from your end as well.
Couple more. So your enterprise architecture function will say, what are you running this on? And they'll say, if it's cloud, they'll say, why aren't we hosting it ourselves? And if it's cloud, they'll say, if it's hosted rather, they'll say, why isn't it cloud? So they will contradict whatever the solution is, and they will pick to bits the plumbing of how this system works. So particularly if it's cloud, they'll go to town on that. So that will happen as well. So make sure that your tooling implementation partner has an architectural model defined, even if it's really simple, so that you're ready to pull that out of your back pocket. Say to your architecture function, this is how it's all plumbed together. And sorry, Martin, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that every now and again, people just feel that they want to say something to, define their position within the organization. So don't be scared if people are asking questions. That's all right. But sometimes people just speak for the sake of speaking. So
Particularly those that have already decided that this is going to be a failure, right? So there will be those that are putting these things out. The other thing that will happen, and I virtually guarantee this, particularly if it's cloud, but also if it's hosted as well, will be your security function will say, we're going to audit the solution, and it's going to take 6 months to do. You can't move until the audit is complete, because we need to apply some kind of security assurance certification to this solution to ensure that it's all kind of bona fide and meets our rules, particularly if you're working in an organization where there are data security concerns. So once again, make sure that has all been worked through as part of the tool implementation. Involve those people, the selection rather. Involve those people at the outset, so that they're familiar with the solution. One thing that is bound to get their back up is when they feel like you're doing this thing to them rather than you're doing it with them, if you see what I mean. So involve architecture, security, and all those good people along the way. Make sure there's no surprises, and then hopefully you'll avoid those fights in the car park.
So, a few predictions from us of things that are going to happen, and now we're going to move on to something else, which is at the start of your implementation, you're going to be given a particular view of the world of how things are going to be worked, and that's based around what salesmen have told you, and in particular, this next phrase. So, out of the box, you're going to hear that phrase so many times when you're going through your tool selection process. It's unbelievable. I'm sure that I've sat in a presentation and literally counted 20 or 30 times that the sales guy said, out of the box. Out of the box is a bit of a nonsense. You get lots of stuff out of the box, but it never actually is a case of just taking it out and it fits straight away. Steve has got some fairly strong opinions on this, I believe.
Oh, out of the box. How many times do you hear it, right? Especially from architectural functions. We're going to implement this, but we're implementing it out of the box. Out of the box is basically the standard configuration that the tool comes with. Um, I cycle and I have a cycling computer, and it has some out of the box functionality, but it doesn't work with my bike until I tell it what bike it is. It doesn't measure speed properly or show me the right information on the screen until I've configured it. And then we come to this word configuration, and I want to just spend 3 minutes ranting about config versus customization, Martin. So um, you will have to configure your tool, personalize the tool to you and your ways of working. That will include things like your logo and your color scheme, but it will also include things like your processes around the approval process, for example, and what step in a request does something need to be approved. Same for change management. You'll have clear approval processes. That the capability will be there out of the box, but the functionality will not, and that will need to be configured. Configuration is very different to customization, where your tool implementation partner will say, oh, no problem, we use a bit of JavaScript or JSON, and we'll go in and configure that for you. It'll take us 5 days at £1,000 a day, and you'll have an additional functionality which is over and above that standard configuration that the tool comes with. So the problem with the phrase out of the box is it means different things to different people, right? If you're saying we're going to use the standard functionality and we're not going to customize it, then yeah, I kind of get that. But you will still need to configure it, personalize it, add your own workflows, your own approvals, and so on. So my contention is if you're going to use the phrase out the box, at least understand what it means. And agree on what it means. Is it no config? So you're not going to personalize it. Well, I doubt that's going to work for you. So don't do that. Or is it no customization? In which case, that's kind of okay, but at least then define what customization actually means to you all and where the red lines are. So I just see this again and again. I see it with big ServiceNow implementations. Other tool sets are available where they say, yeah, we're going to do an out-the-box implementation, and frankly, it's just nonsense. There is standard configuration that is available. You will be able to make use of that capability, but you will still need to personalize it. So I'm hoping that that made sense, but it just kind of wrangles with me about this. There's a white paper I've written, or not, right? There's a blog I've written on the Cinead website. So search Cinead out the box on Google, and we'll add a link to it down below as well, and you can have a look at it yourself. But yeah, just don't get caught up in this terminology because it does mean things to different people.
And Steve's obviously getting very excited there because it looks like there's a small earthquake in Essex because he's bouncing up and down here.
Because I'm banging the desk.
He's banging the desk, and his camera's on the desk, and therefore he's jumping around all over the place. And we have a comment come in here from Robert. Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Hi,
Lovely
Robert.
to see people on live. If a new tool has functionality that is new or innovative, business processes, people, and culture may also need to change. There's a psychological safety and conscious design element to both sides of this issue. And
yes,
yeah, there is. So the tools coming in, that's a big change, but there may well be big changes for the organization as well. So again, we come back to out of the box. How does that affect the organization in general as well? Because there are going to be big cultural changes, and I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit later when we come into Steve's presentation, which he recently did at SITS, which is all about transitioning to a new tool. Here, the message really is out of the box, you're going to have to configure a lot of stuff. So you're going to have to do things like define who's in what team, what roles do they have, what responsibilities do they have, what is the structure for a particular approval process. So these processes will be out of the box, but you probably will have to tweak them, but you're definitely going to have to configure them to include all of the elements which match up with your organization. So don't be fooled to thinking, even if you've got 50 days worth of consultancy with a vendor, that they're going to turn up and do everything for you. They're going to have a long list of questions for you. You need to put in quite a lot of effort and thought around all of those different elements. So that's really the weird thing as well. There is a whole ecosystem around putting products back into the box that have got out of the box and out of control. So that is more aligned with what Steve is saying, where people have gone in and they've started to make changes at the back end of the product set. You can't do that in every product. Some can't compartmentalize it so that you can't make a mess of it. But there are other tool sets out there where you can get into the back-end database. And if you can get into the back end, you can make a right mess of things in an attempt to make it really cool. And when you come to upgrade, you'll have all sorts of issues. So that's where people have created this complete set of companies which specialize in putting things back as they originally were before people started tinkering. So no tinkering. So in line with our timings for this particular show, I think we're spot on at the moment, other than the botched intro by me. But what I'm going to do now is I'm pretty much going to hand the screen over to Steve and let him take you through a very successful presentation he did early morning at SITS. So another transition after which I'll become very tiny. Hey, I'm up here and tiny. I feel I need to shout now because I'm so tiny, but I don't really need to shout. I'm just going to be the angel or demon on Steve's shoulder while he takes you through this presentation. And what I'll probably do is mute myself and then forget to unmute myself. So pretend you're at SIT. Steve, take it away.
Okay, so as Martin said, this is a presentation that I gave just in terms of considering what you do when you're moving from one tool to another. I've been involved in managing a few of these. The very first one that I did, I thought Well, how hard can it be, right? There's an existing tool and there's a new one. You need to move from one to the other. And I started to think about some of the things we'd need to think about for us doing this, and I listed those here. You've got to think about your open tickets. You've got to think about your end user experience and how they're going to deal with this, and that goes back to Robert's earlier point in terms of some of the things around the communication aspect and the business change element of it. Um, You've got to think about single source of truth and at what point you're actually going to transition. Are you going to have two tools running concurrently or not? Got to think about the support teams and how efficient they're going to be, particularly if you're asking them to run two tools side by side. Phasing the functionality implementation, and the thing that really I came back down to at the end of all of this was, your salesman's going to do a great job of selling all the functionality of this tool for you, but you don't want to run before you can walk, and often it's more advisable to keep things simple. So I've got a few slides that describe these points. We'll go through them now. Martin can keep me honest and ask some questions perhaps as we go through, just so you're not hearing my voice all the way. And I'll do my best to rattle through this within the timescales that we have. So let's have a think about ticket types and the open tickets that you have. So I'm thinking here around incidents, problems, changes, and requests. You are going to be in a position where you've got an existing ITSM tool which has open records of those types in your tool. And there will be some which are old, they've already been closed off. There will be others which are aged. In other words, they're open still, but no one's really doing anything with them. And they can, they're the ones that have been kind of open 6 months or more, maybe, where Martin requested an iPhone 12 and that never got approved by his manager. The request is still open. Martin gave up and no one's done anything with it. And you'll also have in-flight tickets. So you'll have open tickets which are just naturally working their way through the workflow that you have in your tool. And at some point during that whole life cycle of open tickets, you're going to need to say, well, we're going to stop on our existing tool and move to the new one. And clearly there's some things to consider there. So I do that over the next few slides. And it's just really answering the question, when are you going to go live? So let's have a think about that. If you've got lots and lots and lots of open tickets, that's going to impact the decision that you make, particularly around incidents and changes. They might have quite and requests actually. They might have quite complex workflow. And if they have a complex workflow, those tickets will be open for longer. So what I mean is, if a request for a new telephone needs to be approved by Martin's manager, and also then needs to be approved by the head of telephony services in your provider organization, and perhaps approved by the supplier as well, then that workflow can mean that ticket's going to be open for a long time. And if you're going to transition it from one tool to another mid workflow, that could be quite complex, because you need to understand for each ticket which stage it's at. So you just want to consider how easy it might be to migrate them to the new tool in terms of mapping the existing fields, but also, as I've said there, the workflow. So what stage in the workflow is it at? The same is true for change management, change tickets. If a change needs to go to a change advisory board type setup for approval, then you're going to need to consider for the change, at which stage is it at? Has it been to CAB yet? Has it not been to CAB? And whereabouts are you going to kind of transition that ticket? And there's never a good time, right? There's never a good time to do this. So we're going to consider some implementation options in a minute that hopefully overcome some of this complexity.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here, Steve, because we've got a couple of notes coming in through.
Good.
Philip, thank you very much for joining us. Um, glad you're here. And one of the things that Phil's saying is whatever you do, don't rush your tool choice. Make sure that you take it easy and you'll end up with the right tool rather than rushing through. So hopefully if you go back to
Good
some of our
advice.
older shows, you'll find a lot of tips around that. Um,
Mm.
and Robert's bringing up a point about historical data um, and compressing it into knowledge bases and putting past tickets into a knowledge base. I'm going to kind of supplement that or talk around that, I think, as well. In all of the implementations I've ever done, we've looked at the old tickets, and this is every single implementation. You look at the old tickets, and people initially will say, "Yeah, we want to bring those into our new
Mm.
system."
Mm.
You then say, "Why are you getting a new system?" "Oh, well, the old system's not really very good." So we then go back and we have a look at the ticket data. Inevitably, it's not very good. There are missing fields, there are missing statements, the quality isn't very good, and that's probably why you're changing tools in the first place. So the value of those tickets is very, very, very limited. So the effort to get them into a new system, it's very, very easy to just pull over basic information. But when you
Mm.
then start to look at things like the timestamps and the historical linking of who's done what at what particular time and any uh, um, additional add-ons that people have dropped in documents or references to other things, they become really, really difficult to migrate from one tool to another. So my
Yeah.
advice always is once you get to the end of the life cycle for a particular ticket, then close that off and new ones go onto the new tool and just archive your old tickets. If you really need to go back to them, then make sure your previous vendor has a system that you can go back, have a look at the archive. Nearly always the ticket data is not worth carrying over. Slightly different
Yeah.
for knowledge bases, absolutely. And I think I have seen Steve's deck, so I know there is a bit about knowledge bases coming up. So I just wanted to bring out Robert and Phil's points there and
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks,
carry on.
Martin, and thanks, Robert and Phil, for commenting. I agree. The other big factor about old tickets, Martin, just while I'm in rant mode, and I'll try not to bang the desk again as I did earlier. But if you think about these AI functions within new ITSM tools that are coming out, they all rely on what you've done on previous tickets. They use a lot of the analysis of how you fixed and codified previous tickets. And if you're introducing new AI functionality into your new tool, the last thing you want to be doing is feeding it a load of bum data that won't be worth anything to it in terms of trying to ascertain um, potential implement resolution paths for incidents, for example, because you'll be feeding it information that is inherently flawed or is indeed has failed. So it's another thing to think about. Um, right, let's move along because I will go on for ages if I'm not careful. My slides are going backwards and forwards, and I'm not sure why. But we've had a few technical challenges today. Hopefully that's settled down now for you. It has for me. So you might decide, as Martin has said, to migrate all the open tickets automatically. So anything that's open, you can bring those across. We don't think that's a good idea. My personal view is if anything is open, leave it in your existing tool until it's closed. Don't try and migrate it because of those issues that we just discussed. You might choose, if you've got a very small number, to rekey the open tickets manually in your new tool. Potentially that's possible for problems, is a good way, typically they're lower volume. But again, could be high maintenance and high effort to do. You might choose, as we've alluded to already, to not migrate them. Work with them in the old tool till they're closed, and then open those new tickets in the new tool. So that's my kind of advice, really. That is my advice, actually. Kind of advice at all. I'm still jet lagged, so my brain's a bit slow. Forgive me. The third bullet there is the advice that I would give. But also, you've got to think about not only incidents, problems, changes, and requests, as I've already alluded to, but you've also got to think about knowledge articles, config data, user data, and locations, existing configurations that you might have for reports, categories, and so on. So let's come to all that in the subsequent slides. But I think that keeping them open in your existing tool and then closing them off is the best way of doing this.
And Phil has just dropped a note in the comments to say that's exactly what he's going to do, primarily
Good.
because the stuff which was in the old system wasn't categorized correctly, or certainly wasn't aligned potentially with a new method of categorization. That's another thing I should point out. People use the opportunity of putting a new service desk tool in to completely rejig their categorization. And if they do that, then the data definitely is going to be useless to you. So, yeah, take the opportunity to start afresh. That's my take on that one. And I mean, typically, if you look at categorization going back a number of years, people might start off with hardware and software, and then break it down to Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, blah blah blah. That's not the way most people now do categorization. They nearly always do it via a business model, or if you're ServiceNow, via the CSDM version 2.0, which is a great categorization model, or Service Towers, another categorization model, but they're not doing them how they used to do them. So another good reason to ditch the old data.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move on to CMDB then. You will have spent a lot of time bringing configuration management data into your CMDB. The third bullet there, I've just read it, and it couldn't be more simple, really, could it? You would expect me to say this, wouldn't you? But you'd be surprised how many organizations will still spend a lot of time and effort bringing across dirty data from their old tool to their new tool. So, audit your data, audit your CMDB, understand what data is good and clean, what data is not, and focus upon bringing over the clean data. If there are gaps, then don't bring the data across. I've just seen so many occasions where a whole ecosystem grows up, Martin, where they've got an existing CMDB, the structure doesn't match the new one, so they create models upon models to say, well, we're going to take this data, we're going to map it to this Excel tool that's going to transition it to the new structure, and then we're going to do a bulk upload. And you think, well, there's a whole cottage industry grown up here in terms of bringing dirty data across. So, it's common sense, right? Just bring the clean data across and leave the dirty data where it is. Um, there's a further consideration around CMDB, which is at what point do you transition from one to the other. We've discussed already here about having open tickets in your existing tool and opening new tickets in your new tool. It does kind of mean that you're going to end up with the CMDB in a state of transition across both tools. So you need to consider the implications of that. I'm going to move on to the next slide then. So consider it. Avoid running the two CMDBs, as I've said. You might want to just, during that transitionary period, have a period of time where you're kind of checking the integrity of both and keeping them update and in line with one another. My strong preference would be, if you're in a transitionary state, only update the new CMDB and leave the old CMDB in the old tool as it is. Because that new tool presents you with a great opportunity to improve CMDB structure and content in line with the dream that the salesman has showed you. So embrace that opportunity. Don't just be inclined to take the existing CMDB structure and copy it to the new tool, because it could be inherently flawed. So embrace that opportunity to improve it.
And I think that's generically The message there is embrace the opportunity to change your processes, your CMDB, your category structures, and everything there. And Robert makes a point about some old data may be required for KPI reporting.
Maybe.
I think that that's a reasonable statement, but I would tend to draw a line under that as a baseline, literally. And if you try and do reporting across old tickets and new tickets, you will give yourself a minefield of problems to try and deal with. So that is a bit of a challenge, but if you do KPI reporting on your old system at the time it closes down, and then start your new system up, and then look at where things are in the new system, you may well have different KPIs. So, so again, it's one of these things that once you change, maybe your old stuff isn't valid, maybe it's not comparable. So it's one of those difficult things. And
Certainly wouldn't be
Phil's
sorry,
saying,
Robert. To Robert's point, Martin,
yeah,
I wouldn't be inclined to run those new KPI reports out of the new tool on the old data. Run it off the old tool because you've already got them set up. Sorry, Martin, go ahead.
yeah, I totally agree with that. And Phil's saying he's having to do a full asset audit for the new tooling. So that plays back to some of the things that you've previously mentioned.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Get that data, the data trusted, and then you know what you're bringing across. Right, let's move along then. So I think there is a number of implementation options. Big Bang would be one that only the brave perhaps consider, where you leave on a Friday night and when you come in on a Monday morning, you're using the brand new tool. I think inevitably you're going to have a period of dual running. You are going to have a period of time where your existing tickets are being run down in your old tool. A clean Big Bang approach is inherently risky, and to the point earlier made by Phil, I think, comes with inherently some business change challenges to it as well, because you're going to need to be considering how you're going to be doing that, how you're going to be running on the old tool with the old tickets. Are you going to be migrating them across? What does that mean to your technical teams? What does it mean to Martin and his phone request that we talked about? Is he suddenly now going to be tracking that phone request in a brand new tool? And how does he do that? So there's a lot of things to consider there. Some smaller organizations with smaller ticket volumes might consider some swivel chair keying, so they'll key in one system and then they'll key on the other side to the other system. But also, think about stakeholder comms. I mentioned there about Martin and his phone request. If the users have access to the tool for a knowledge base, or maybe ticket progress, request progress type things, knowledge data, etc., and it's going to be going and looking different, the functionality is looking different, they might have to go to a new location. Then make sure that the stakeholders are aware of it. And someone at the beginning said, don't rush. That's one part of my timing is everything comment there. Don't rush it. But the other part of it is just consider when you're doing it. There will be times of lower ticket volume. There'll be times of lower business stress, of less things happening elsewhere in the business. You want to be considering the best times to do it and do this. It is disruptive. It will require comms to all the stakeholders, not just the technical teams, but the business folks as well. And it needs to be in that format of tell people what you're going to do, tell them how you're going to do it, tell them when you're doing it, and then tell them what you've done. And that's a considerable amount of effort. So make sure that you haven't underestimated that, and don't try and do it at a time where you've already got lots of other competing priorities. I'm going to very carefully phrase that, because I don't want you to think that you've got that I've already got 1,000 other things going on, Steve. There's never a good time. When am I going to implement it? I get it. I understand that. I'm just saying, look at the time when you've got the least number of things happening and try and minimize that risk. Okay. So remembered earlier on, we were saying there'll be some things that happen, Martin, and we talked about categorization and security and architecture and a few other fights in the car park that were going to occur. The other one is testing. Um, you may well have a fairly relaxed approach to testing, but there will be others in your organization that don't. If you have a testing function, you need to ensure that they're engaged early, because they will have their own testing standards, their own test strategy, their own test approaches that will need to be aligned to. And this is one that has caught organizations out in the past. They get the plan from the the tool implementer, and it says testing 2 weeks, and then it hits the testing team in the organization who's receiving this tool, and they say, well, hang on a minute, no, because we do integration testing, regression testing, unit testing, security breach testing, etc., etc., etc. And that can't be achieved within those timescales. So bring your testing team into your team. Don't keep them as outsiders. I'm just thinking of my recent experience here and my functional and the relationship that we built up with our testing team during that time. It proved invaluable, right? Work together, document the tests, and have clear outcomes against which pass-fail criteria can be assessed, so you know whether the tool is going to be fit for purpose. Write the test scripts and manage the testing rigorously. Hopefully, you will have a very uh, on the ball testing manager who's going to be all over this and managing it for you. Get someone to do it. It takes a lot of effort, but in all the implementations I've been involved in, the ones where testing takes a prominent role are the ones which are most successful. So just make sure that you're giving ample airtime to testing. Don't take the simple things for granted and say, well, that worked in the demo, so it's going to work in prod. Doesn't always work out like that. So make sure that you test everything. Looks like you want to chip in, Martin. I can see you fidgeting.
Yeah. What I'm really thinking is, quite often on implementations, I see UAT, user acceptance testing, 2 weeks, and the vendor never really defines that any further. It's just user acceptance testing. Well, when that's completed, everything works, obviously. So, be careful of what user acceptance testing is, and make sure that your users are testing and accepting stuff, not just your
Yeah.
test team, okay? Because it's user acceptance testing. Robert is very kindly offering up his children to do stress testing if you need to do that as well. So yeah, do stress testing and load testing on stuff as well, because that can have a giant impact on things. Tends to be a bit better now in the cloud, but because things scale. But certainly previous lives, I have found big problems with stress testing. And then
Yes.
what everybody then does is they all then suddenly produce a totally unrealistic scenario where everybody tries to do the same thing at the same time. That never happens in real life. So don't
No.
get 50 people to try and log a call simultaneously with exactly the same category structures at exactly the same time. That doesn't happen. There will be seconds or microseconds or minutes between people logging calls. They
It
don't
will.
log them all simultaneously. So, yeah, stress testing is very important, but just take it with a pinch of salt when
Just
trying to do things simultaneously.
just on that, Martin, whilst we're giving pearls of wisdom, with a cloud product, your service provider will say to you, there's tons of capacity. You don't need to do any testing because our infrastructures can multiply. You can have as many transactions as you like. That's all very well and good, but how about your local LAN? And how about your network connection out to the internet, your WAN from your corporate devices? So have a think about that as well. I was recently in a situation whereby the internet connection from the actual offices where the staff were working was already quite stressed. And then we added to that by adding a cloud-based ITSM tool on top, and things started to wobble a little bit. So think about that and get that testing considered as well. Let's move out of the thorny path of testing, Martin. Let's get onto something a bit more sexy. User adoption. So we talked about this. We've touched on this previously, but I just want to go over the key points, right? And there's a message hiding in here somewhere, right? So you will have bought this tool from the salesman who will have promised you, I can't think of a better phrase, the moon on a spoon, right? So there's a ton of new functionality. You're desperate to bring in the AI model. You want to bring in the automated login. So when you type one word, all the rest of the fields get completed, etc., etc. And that's brilliant. It's great functionality. But don't forget, there's an end user in IT, so your agents, and there are also some end users out there who are consuming this tool when they want to log things. And it's very, very difficult for people to absorb too much change all at once. So as I said at the outset, consider your stakeholder groups, consider rather the change on the extent of change that those stakeholder groups are going to be subjected to, and consider phasing the introduction of this. Consider it, and it mitigates the risk of your cutover, right? Because you're not making your cutover too complex. You're cutting over with a minimal amount of functionality and then gradually adding that later. And whilst I'm on this, you can also consider user adoption as well. So how do you drive people to use this tool? You may well be in an organization where your tooling salesperson once again has said, well, we can drive end user engagement here and they can use this functionality because it will take a lot of the work away from you. Now, that's all very well and good, but you've got to incentivize people to use the thing in the first place. So have a think about that, and have a think about groups who can act as an advocate for you. So during that early part of testing and into go live, who are your teams who can begin to kind of shout on from the rooftops about how fantastic the tooling is, so that you can get some of those outlying groups who perhaps don't use the tool today to engage with it. And also perhaps spot other opportunities for enterprise service management as well, outside of the traditional service management function. So there's some good opportunities lying there. In my recent experience, for some of the complex implementations, tend to have dedicated expert testing resources and dedicated expert business change, user adoption type resources as well. Don't try and do all of this stuff yourself. Get the experts in to help you with it, particularly around comms and training, because there's a lot to understand there.
Okay, me to pick up on several points there. Go back a slide. Phased implementations. One of the things that I've found can be very successful is if you break it down into locations or departments or different countries, if you're on multiple different countries. So don't just roll the stuff out to everyone at once. You may want to choose some more technically adept people to start off with as well. So just consider when you're rolling things out, the options that are available to you. In terms of testing, Robert brought up a good one there, which is test a major incident before you release, which I think is a great piece of advice, because that will touch nearly every point within the system.
Robert's done this before, I can tell. Yeah. Good advice, Robert.
Robert's probably done it before. We've been there before. And that is a great piece of advice. In terms of incentivizing people, I saw a great one that a university actually did, which was they went down to the canteen at lunchtime with sort of pop-up stands and a few monitors and stuff. And they wanted the students to come over and have a play with their new service portal that they've got available. And what they actually did was give them free sweets or free donuts or something like that. So the students were queuing up in a line to come and try out the new service portal, after which they got rewarded with a small bag of sweets or a donut or something like that, or a piece of fruit. Sorry, I should be healthy here as well. But apparently that worked really, really well. So actually going out into the community and showcasing your stuff rather than hiding behind the end of
Yeah,
a
definitely.
global email out to everybody saying we've got a new service portal when nobody knows what a service portal is. So
Yeah,
yeah, go out, show them, demo them, get the users to adopt it because they want to. Let them know it's good for them. So that's what I think it's worth
indeed.
doing. Phil's also made an interesting point is that during his process of procurement, he's reached out to local businesses, colleges, universities to see if they're looking for a new tool as well, and then combined forces, which I think is a
Hmm,
great idea, so that
interesting.
multiple people can combine forces to go look at tools. And it's a great way to narrow down the tools. You may not end up all with the same tool because you might have different requirements, but it's a good way of getting multiple people within that process to help you filter out which are the best tools that you think are for the job. So yeah, next slide. Sorry, I'm just picking up on a few of those as I
No, that's all right. No
shoot
problem at
through.
all. No worries. So look, we're nearly at the end of this, and I realise we're short on time, but a special note on knowledge bases here, right? So, um, consider your knowledge strategy. What are you going to do around knowledge bases? You have a great opportunity with the implementation of the new tool to exploit some new knowledge management functionality. So make sure the knowledge articles themselves are up to date. Perhaps take the opportunity to fill any gaps. Um, Make sure that any new content that you want to bring in is in there, and the users know how to engage with it, and that there's a process for maintaining knowledge and providing feedback. The worst type of knowledge bases are those where the knowledge gets input when the tool goes live and it's never then updated. So take the opportunity to um, like exploit the new knowledge management functionality that you've been sold, but think about the underpinning process and governance around knowledge to ensure then that it's able to really provide some value to your organization.
A good resource on that is KCS, Knowledge Centered Support or Knowledge Centered
Mm,
Service, which is a process a bit like ITIL type processes, but a whole bunch of processes around knowledge management. Highly, highly recommend you go have a look at KCS and look at the processes around not only maintaining your knowledge, but keeping it current and getting it better, and how to update stuff in the best possible way. And some people say the best KPI is reuse of existing knowledge. I agree with that to some degree, except for if people are continuously going back to the same solution for a problem, it's about time you solved the problem. So
yeah, yeah, there is that.
the fact that they're frequently being able to fix something is great, but just fix it. So
Indeed. I've already talked about comms plan, so I'm not going to really overemphasize this, but you know, you've got to think about the stakeholder groups and the training and so on. Make sure that you give an adequate time to this. Not only hands-on training, perhaps, but chalk and talk type sessions, sandpit type sessions where people can just play with the tool and become familiar with it. And then think about early life support. This is a critical enterprise system for you. Treat it as such as you would any other critical system. Ensure you've got suitable early life support. So you've got technicians on hand should any issues crop up. You've got the change team ready to approve any changes that might be necessary to the tool to help you get a nice, stable, and successful implementation. Who's going to provide it? How bugs will be categorized? The speed with which they'll be resolved, etc. You're going to need to have all of those things understood. So develop a one-pager early life support strategy that says this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, who's going to do it, when it's going to occur, etc., and get that strategy reviewed, approved, read by all the appropriate folks in your organization.
yeah, this is your snagging list, right? So it's going to
It
happen.
is.
and
You
you're
will.
going to move into your new house, and everything will look great until you've been in for a couple of weeks, and then the plaster will start to settle, and door handles will fall off, and it's the snagging list. So we need to get onto that. I'm going to move us out of your slideshow, Steve, and onto our
Thank you.
final scene with a transition.
Let's do it.
I always think for a minute it's not going to get past that transition, and then it does.
You made it eventually.
I need to make it a second slower or something like that. So yet again, we've managed to fill up a good hour's worth of chatting with almost no scripting there. And thanks for joining us, in particular, Robert and Philip, for dropping in your comments there.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
If you'd like to hear more of this, there is 7 or 8 hours of it on YouTube. The subscribe one in the middle, go to that. Well done, you've pointed correctly. If you want all of that stuff on Freshworks and stuff to do with the mind map, then that's the teardrop logo on the nearer me, and the one above Steve with his Cinead IT golf ball type logo in will take you to a whole bunch of interesting stuff with papers on tooling and maturity assessments, and indeed one on out of the box, does it work or not?
There's a search facility on that website as well, so feel free to search that up. The other thing I wanted to say on the YouTube thing, I'd love to see the YouTube stuff take off a bit more. We're on LinkedIn, and it's lovely to have people here, but can you nip over to YouTube and subscribe, and maybe hit a like button, and maybe a comment, and then it'd be good to see that take off, because I think there's a whole audience out there who maybe don't use LinkedIn who would make use of this stuff. So if you've watched this and you've enjoyed it, then please help us out with that.
And invite a few friends next time round. So
Yeah.
talking of next time round, Steve and I have agreed to put together a list of the forthcoming sessions that we're going to be doing, and we're going to be inviting some guests along as well. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn for that, but we're going to literally put out a program of future events, because we're kind of getting a lot of good feedback so far, and I think people are enjoying this. So
if there's anything you want to see, then feel free. If there's any hot topics, issues, things that you think that me and Martin should be talking about, then feel free to comment and let us know, and we'll make sure we can incorporate those as well.
Yeah, so we shall do that in the future. And I'm delighted to say that we finished almost exactly on time. Any feedback that you've got, drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear how we can improve things. And hopefully I can improve by avoiding my technical issue where my video froze at the beginning of this one. And hopefully the video is not going to freeze on the outro, which only lasts a few seconds anyway. So cheerio from Edinburgh. Thanks for joining, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.